Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Deuce85, and we're powered by and brought to you by the world famous FTN Network. We're coming to you with week 2 of the college football season. I know NFL just started. We have the NFL Thursday, all that going on, but those real grinders out there, you know who you are. We're watching that Louisville beatdown of the Murray State Racers. Got our whistles wet, and we're ready to go. We got a 2-game slate tomorrow. We're going to be diving into that with the slate breakdown. But tonight, we're going to be, of course, talking about the main slate for Saturday. 13 games primarily focused on DraftKings. I'll talk a little bit about the FanDuel stuff, too. There's been more and more people playing FanDuel again. I guess that's a good thing. And we'll also be getting my good friend, co-pilot, co-host, my man, Jay Kuchek, on here in a second. And we'll do our thing where we go game by game, breaking down each and every one of the main slate games from a DFS perspective. We'll also be talking about PrizePicks at the end, giving you a core, also any betting opportunities. And then at the very, very end, we'll give a line in the sand play from Jake to end it. We'll see how he does there. His man Ray Davis did pretty well. And we're very, very excited for week 2. We have a few more blowout type games and maybe a week or two left before we get into the conference games, and we'll start seeing some more competitive balance games. But there's a lot to talk about. I will push my man Jake through. Jake, there he is. How are you, man? How was last week, and how are you feeling heading into this week?
What's going on, man? It was an interesting week last week. I was on top of the world on Friday evening. I was not swayed at all by the will he, won't he Jalen Daniels game that we seem to always do with him. Went 100% Jason Bean, went 100% Pofili Ashlock, and got just all the fantasy points, and being allowed a whole lot of other kind of high-end plays in the lineup. So did very, very well on Friday night. Didn't do quite as well on the main slate, and did not have enough exposure to that TCU Colorado scoring fantasy point bonanza. I think we talked about the Monty Bailey versus Trey Sanders thing at length, and it turns out it didn't matter because Dylan Edwards on the other side was the guy that you needed to have. And I actually didn't look up how much he was owned. He was not somebody that I had any exposure to, and so it's probably an oversight on our part, thinking that he wasn't going to go for 4 touchdowns. And look at that. Fair enough. He put us all to shame. But it was a little bit disappointing to not follow up the big Friday night, cashing all over the place with lots of green screens with another day like that on Saturday. But that'll happen, especially, early in the season, a lot of blowouts, a little bit too much exposure to the Iowa offense that didn't get things going the way that I was hoping that they would with Caleb Johnson. And despite not getting to the 150-3 from Ray Davis, he still had I think like 120-2. So hoping for 150-3 and falling short at 120-2 is not so bad. So at least we got my Ray Davis play right, but I'm hoping to get some other plays right along with my line in the sand play this week.
Yeah, and funny enough about the Colorado game, it really wasn't. I mean, Bonnie Bailey did have some ownership, but the Colorado guys in general, like Shedeur Sanders wasn't really owned like I thought he was going to be. Hunter really wasn't. Certainly Edwards wasn't. And there were a couple of plays where we just got robbed. Like Judkins scored his 2 touchdowns on 15 touches only. So yeah, it was just a victimize of the blowout games. But the Colorado one didn't have the ownership that you might have thought. However, coming into this week, it certainly will. We don't even have to mess around with not thinking that, because everybody and their mom's going to be trying to stack that one. So a lot of games on the slate, 13, a nice rounded number. The Colorado game, definitely one to look at. The Ole Miss Tulane game looks like it has some juice. There is some, clunker type games here with low, Northwestern UTEP's not really that great. But then there's a game like Virginia James Madison where I have a play in that game that I feel pretty passionately about. So we're going to find some good ones here. And I'm still committed to our guy, Caleb Johnson from Iowa. Couldn't find some lanes, did score a touchdown, had a big, like a 27-yard run early in the game. And then they kind of went away from him a little bit. And then the passing game was like, I remember I kept saying, passing game just needs to be mediocre. Just needs to be mediocre. And they kept on passing, and it was like still pretty average, but slightly above average, and that was enough to make the run game a little bit negligent. So, that Iowa offense, man, it's better than people were thinking, though. All right, so we're gonna jump right in here. First game on the slate, you're gonna take the wing here. NC State versus Notre Dame. We have a total of 50.5. Notre Dame a 7.5-point favorite. I kind of like the Wolfpack here, but Notre Dame has definitely looked good in their first 2 games. What do you think?
Yeah, super interesting matchup. Outside of the DFS aspect of it, just an interesting contrast of an NC State team that I think we expect a lot from Brennan Armstrong to kind of solidify that offense and get them into another gear, and then Notre Dame has just absolutely steamrolled far inferior opponents in their first 2. Are they overconfident, playing on the road in this next game, having dealt with the travel, pretty well, and not showing any signs of weakness against an FCS school last week? I mean, how much of a test is that really? I think we do see him get tested here, and I think that line is a little bit too much. If it stays over 7, I think we stay on the NC State side of that one. And in terms of the DFS perspective, that is what we're here for mainly. I think Hartman is actually pretty interesting here. They haven't had to air the ball out yet. They haven't, let him be fully unleashed, let him cook in the way that we know he's capable of and we've seen him do in the past. And so that might be a scenario where he gets a little bit more of that. I don't love the price. It seems like that's a little bit much to ask for the kind of game that this is going to be. I think this is going to be a harder fought game, but I do think that the ball ends up in his hands more often than not. I think they'll probably not have as well, definitely won't have as much success as they've had running the ball against 2 terrible opponents. But I think they probably will have more success in general in the passing game. And so with that said, if we're looking to pair someone with Hartman, we don't always have to do that. But if we're going to do that, I think probably Jaden Thomas is where I'm looking to get that exposure. We just haven't seen them pass a lot. They haven't needed to do it yet, but we have seen Hartman kind of look his way to start, at least in the Navy game. Had a decent amount of targets and decent amount of receptions and yards. After that, it's kind of a round robin of who you think is going to break the long touchdown. Obviously, Tyree is a guy that's been around that program for a long time, kind of dependent on a big play to get him valued. Probably not a ton of volume there. Not super interested. And then Greathouse had that ridiculous game against Navy. 3 catches, 2 of which went for touchdowns. You're probably not going to get that kind of efficiency from him either. So I think the only one that I expect to see a decent amount of volume is Jaden Thomas. But I would probably be more comfortable running Hartman by himself than stacking him up with a receiver, just because I think they do have a tendency to kind of spread it around. Running game wise, I think obviously if they do get rolling, we're going to see the volume probably go to Audric Estime a good amount. I don't see them mixing it up as much as they have against the overmatched opponents. But that said, I just I see them getting it done more through the air. On the other side, I'm not getting to 9-2 for Brennan Armstrong. I do like him. I do like the development that we'll probably see from him as the year progresses. But this is going to be a pretty tough defense that he's going up against. I think there's better spots to allocate salary. That backfield, I don't think I want any part of either this week or in future weeks. It's just kind of a mess, and you get so much Brennan running both for short yardage situations, going for first downs, and also near the goal line. That a lot of that touchdown equity and usage equity that running backs would typically see is kind of lessened in that sort of offense. And then on a similar note with receivers, we were hoping for big things from Concepcion in their opener against UConn. Didn't quite get there, despite seeing some volume. Didn't quite do what we wanted him to do. And I really think that it's kind of just the Brennan show, especially when he gets close to the goal. He loves to pull it right. So both of these quarterbacks, I would probably, I don't mind having exposure to Hartman. I'm probably not getting to Brennan, but if you do end up using one or even both of them, I would feel even less of a tendency or necessity with pairing them with a receiver, as opposed to other games on the slate where I think you can see a lot of alpha in pairing with a receiver that the quarterback tends to lock onto a little bit more. So basically my main takeaway is either Hartman or Estime, probably not both, and maybe Hartman, with a receiver in Jaden Thomas, but that's probably it for me from this game.
Yeah, it seems like one of those games that's going to be like drastically overlooked, and at the end of it, people are going to be like, "Oh, why didn't we have more of that?" Because it sails over, and it's like 35-31 or something like that. I feel like there's going to be points, but both offenses just early on, like at least with Notre Dame, with Audric is going to be there, but their wide receivers, my God, like I'm just waiting for Merriweather to transfer any day now. That top defender for Florida just hit the transfer portal earlier today in the middle of the season, so we'll probably see more. But I kind of like this game, definitely from the betting perspective, like we talked about. I'm not that unhappy with our guy KC Kevin Concepcion. We'd let the team in targets with 5, just didn't really produce 4 for 36, but he's going to be a big-time star eventually, sooner rather than later, so I still like our guy there. All right, moving on to a game that nobody will really be on, but I kind of pride myself on trying to find players in these low-total games, but we have the Dukes of James Madison on the slate, which is fun, playing that lowly Virginia team. It's a 40.5 total, one of the lowest on the board. So we know right away people that play casually or they build their lineups based off of totals. We see it all the time. There's not going to be much ownership, if any at all, on this game. James Madison is a 6.5-point favorite, which I do like that. I think Virginia is really, really awful, and I think they could lose this game by double digits. Tony Muskett's still listed as starting quarterback. He has a shoulder injury listed as day-to-day. Not that important because we're not going to use him. Just letting you guys know about the situation. Anthony Colandera would start if Muskett can't. He was okay, but just a really, really bad situation. The running backs, Paris Jones scored a touchdown last week, but only 7 carries. I don't have a lot of interest there. The wide receivers are somewhat playable if either Muskett or Colandera can throw the ball. Malachi Fields sitting there pretty cheap, both under 5K for Malik Washington and Malachi Fields. Fields, 4 catches, 63 yards on 8 targets, led the team. Actually played 69% of the snaps, so he was on the field a lot. Malik Washington, of course, Northwestern transfer, 4 catches for 29 yards, nothing really exciting there. Was targeted 7 times, played 67.7% of the snaps. So those 2 guys are playing a lot and will be on the field. And Malachi Fields, I feel like if there's anybody to be owned in this game, that'll be where maybe people look as the cheap wide receiver. It's typically the WR3 that you need. I don't hate it, but the quarterback play is just so horrific. I mean, Fields, Washington on the field a lot, that's nice, but if there's not a very good quarterback to throw them the ball, it really doesn't matter. If they're getting like 2 for 22 or something like that, that sub 5K price point really won't get the job done either way. So where my interest lies is more on the James Madison side. Not at quarterback, where they had to use multiple quarterbacks in their first game against Bucknell. That was obviously a big-time win for them. Jordan McLeod, who missed all but like 2 games last year with an injury, came into that one with an OR tag. He didn't actually start. Alonzo Barnett did, who was pretty awful. McLeod came into the game in the second half, threw for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns on 11 passes, completed 7 of those. So it was enough for him to earn the start now. So coming into it, he's going to be the starter. He's actually a pretty interesting GPP play because he's only 5K, so you're getting that min-price QB play. You're playing multiple lineups, perhaps. You're chasing, the up-top prize. McLeod is somebody who could actually pay off this 5K price tag against this Virginia team. The backfield for JMU might go overlooked. It's a bit of a committee backfield, but Kalen Black is the guy who really emerged in that last game. 12 carries only, but he did rush for 125 yards. Quick math, YPC right around 10.5. That's pretty solid. Latrell Palmer rushed for 45 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 10 carries. He'll still factor in the mix, but on the current depth chart, the most recent one that released, Black is listed as starter, no OR tag. The Virginia team, they were gashed quite a bit by the Vols' rushing attack. Jalen Wright rushed for 115 yards, Jabari Small 67, and Dylan Sampson 52, although he scored 3 touchdowns on 13 carries. So you put all of that into one player perhaps, and you have a potential for Kalen Black to maybe rush for 150 yards. Of course, Latrell Palmer, like I said, is going to factor in there, but if we can get Black up to like 18, 19, 20 touches perhaps, I think he obliterates his price point. He did play 45% of the snaps compared to Palmer's 28, so he's definitely the alpha there, and he's only 4.2. So I'm really interested in him. There are several running back options on this slate that I like. If ever there was a week early to start on the 4 running back train, this might be it. I'm not there yet, but Kalen Black is definitely in the top half of my running back player pool. They also have a kid by the name of Reggie Brown, very cheap, 4.5. Caught 2 of his 5 targets for 77 yards and a touchdown. I know that's super efficient, but he did lead the team in 5 targets, played 81% of the snaps. That's right. So he was on the field pretty much the entire game. So you have a couple of cheap options there for James Madison if you want them against this Virginia team that I think we're going to be picking on quite a bit this year. They are, a bit slower, so I don't know that they're going to get into shootouts, but I do think that they're going to give up a lot of yards, and RB1s against them should absolutely detonate each and every week. So I am on this Kalen Black train, Jake, and I like a little bit of Reggie Brown. Did you have anyone in this game, or was this one that you kind of just buzzed over?
Yeah, you know what? The Kalen Black thing stood out to me too. So we're completely on the same page there. It does seem like, maybe the usage will trend a little bit more in his direction, and we don't need him to get 25 carries, right? Like, you can do pretty well on 15 to 18. And that's, a very slight uptick from what he got last week. And this, even though Virginia is terrible, this should be probably a little bit more competitive of a game than they had against Bucknell. So there might be, a tendency to leave him in a little bit longer and salt clock kind of towards the end of it. So yeah, no, hit the nail on the head there. I probably wouldn't do him and Jordan McLeod in the same lineup kind of thing. But yeah, very, very much interested in Kalen Black as, a value piece that will really open up things for the rest of the lineup.
All right, moving right along here, we go to the Purdue game versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, a slight favorite, 3 points, a total of 48. And there are some pieces on both sides here that I know I'm interested in, and I'm sure you actually mentioned somebody on the Purdue side in the Discord earlier this week. So what do you think for the Purdue game?
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know how nostalgic or superstitious you get, but if you see diminutive guy in a number 4 Purdue uniform, it kind of conjures up Rondale Moore feelings for me, and might be a little bit early to start giving Deion Burks Rondale Moore comparisons just yet, but that was like an 84-yard catch or something for a touchdown that obviously solidified his fantastic fantasy day. Or I don't think they were on any slate that we covered, but it was the day was four catches for 152 yards and a touchdown, 84 of those coming on a single catch, which was a fantastic catch and run. It was like a 7-yard slant that he just beat 6 defenders for a touchdown. And I thought for a second I was watching a Rondale Moore highlight. So yeah, it was pretty interesting to see all of that kind of come together in that athleticism. 4 catches, I think 9 targets as well. So definitely a part of the offense that they are going to want to have involved early and often, and he's pretty attractively priced as well at 4.8. The downside is you have Hudson Card throwing him the ball, and so we've seen how bad Hudson Card can be at times, especially in the Texas days. Thought maybe that he was going to be the heir apparent for a while. And didn't really do much with that opportunity, and now he finds himself at Purdue. The good news is he's going up against a Virginia Tech defense that's probably going to allow some plays to be made, and it seems as though Burks can find some space and create after the catch. And so I think that I'm probably more interested in using Burks on his own than pairing him with Card, just because I think most of the passing offense is going to go through Burks anyway. But if you're looking for a super low owned stack, I don't think that many people are going to get to Hudson Card on this slate. And I do like this game a good amount to be pretty competitive, and probably more points than the total would suggest. I think they're at like 47. Is that right?
Around 48.
48. Yeah. So I see that probably going over, not because these are, dominant offenses by any means, but the defenses are pretty terrible. And I'll also say on the other side, yes, it was against Old Dominion, but Grant Wells looked pretty good last week for Vatek and played an extremely clean game, which is never a Grant Wells staple. So I don't know if he'll be able to repeat that against Purdue. It's not like Purdue is some awesome defense to be afraid of. So I think that if I were to go with a quarterback wide receiver pairing from this game, it's probably going to be Wells and one of his receivers. Now, which wide receiver is also a question, because you got two transfers, Jennings and Lane, both of which saw a lot of volume, both of which were productive in their old systems and also now with Wells. And maybe that was just the problem, is Grant Wells didn't have the type of options that he wanted to throw to in the past, and now he does. Transfer portal can solve all problems, kind of thing. So a lot of volume to those two. If you wanted to get super crazy with and think this game gets to like 60, and you throw in a Grant Wells, Jennings, Lane, and Burks, mega stack, I think that's something that not a lot of people are going to be doing, but that's a lot of very concentrated and targeted production where, you could have some quick scores happen and have a lot of back and forth. So, not something to do in every lineup, certainly, but if you were looking for a game to stack up that the masses will probably not be on and have a lot of exposure to, I think that's probably how I would go about it. You'll notice that I did not mention any running backs at all. Just a lot of split backfield stuff happening. Purdue, rotated Maccabee and Tracy, and every now and then you'd see Dylan Downey in there too, and then Vatek about as split as you can get between Tootin and Thomas. And Tootin, I guess, gets a little bit more love in terms of how they use him and some versatility, but it's really just kind of a split. And I think most of this game, kind of similar to the NC State and Notre Dame game, happens through the air, and I think the defenses are just worse in this one. So I could see this hitting like a 53 to 55 kind of total, with it being a competitive game throughout and a lot of back and forth scoring. So I really like this one, and I like the passing games from each side.
Yeah, I couldn't bring myself to roster Wells, but I like the call. 7-4 is certainly a decent enough price for, like you said, GPPs. I actually think that Hudson Card might get more ownership than maybe you or I expect. He's only 6K, and I think that there's a lot of upper tier options and some expensive guys at quarterback. So I think people with that super flex, they might look to get a little bit cheap. And we know from, just looking at those defenses, Purdue and Virginia Tech are going to be secondaries that we can target a lot. So I think we might see, not like 70% or some stupid number, but like 25, 30% Hudson Card might be staring down the barrel of the Hudson Card gun there. So that, I don't know if that scares you at all, but that's a possibility.
Even more reason to fade for me then. I'll take all of my exposure through one receiver.
Yeah, and that almost makes me kind of like Maccabee a little bit. I wish he was priced out. I know you mentioned Tracy and Downing, pilfering looks, and they definitely are. I don't know that Maccabee's going to be this like Braylon Allen-esque type option unless there's injuries. But at 6'3", certainly playable and somebody to look at. But there are just some other guys that I definitely prefer over him. And I am involved with Deion Brooks too at 4.8. I think he's probably one of the higher owned wide receivers on the slate just because of his price. Hard to get away from him. And on the other side, Jalen Lane's 5'2", so I think people would tend to go there. He definitely had a really nice game. But I love Allie Jennings, barely getting an opportunity for West Virginia. He just balls out for 2 years at Old Dominion, plays against his former team, which I didn't even really think about at the time. I had so much going on last week, but he completely detonated against them. Played really, really well. And I think, he's going to be, the guy's back-to-back years of 900 plus receiving yards, playing with Grant Wells, who can definitely, like you said, make mistakes, but he can chuck the ball down the field too. Caught 5 of his 7 targets for 72 yards. Did score twice. So I like Allie Jennings a lot. And I think because he's priced at 6'7", more people will go to Lane. And I'm not afraid to perhaps pay that price for Jennings, even though I'm typically against paying too high a price for wide receivers. 6'7" is still a price I can get behind. So I think for me, I'm on Jennings, but I think Lane makes a lot of sense. And then I think, I'm scared of the Bichelle Tootin play because he's 5'6", so we're not exactly getting a huge discount. He did have 22 touches between 19 carries and 3 targets, but he didn't do a whole lot with them. And like you said, he could be the one, say he racks up 75 yards, but then Malachi comes in and scores twice. Then it's like, oh, shoot, I paid 5-6 for this guy to give me, under 10 points. He didn't even score a touchdown. So I do think there's going to be a time and place for him, but I tend to agree with you. The receivers are probably the way to go. Tootin does get receiving work, though, so he is a little bit of an option, but just the price of 5-6 isn't quite the discount or the bargain that we're looking for there. All right, moving on to Troy versus Kansas State. We have a 17-point spread here for K-State and a total over 51.5. Starting out with Troy, they have Gunnar Watson, who has been there for a long time. What I have to say about him is he did throw for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns last week, but I wouldn't recommend using him here against Kansas State. I do absolutely love Kamani Vidal. He is somebody we've used on past weekday, Fun Belt slates. Just under 250 yards last week on 25 carries, huge volume. You look at who they have in the backfield. There was a bit of a committee at times last year and the year before, but it looks like he's going to be getting a huge workload and one of the last few bell cows really remaining. You look around at all the teams now who are running committees or 1A, 1B situations or 70-30. There's really nobody who's getting that, I say Braylon Allen-esque because he's really one of the last ones. Bijan Robinson, who would getting 35 touches, Mo Ibrahim perhaps, and Vidal is somebody who I think will have that opportunity. I mean, against SF Austin, it was a little bit closer than you would have thought, but even when it started to get out of hand, they just kept letting him pound the rock. He did catch 2 passes for 54 yards as well, which you love to see. And his usage should be pretty damn good. He had 60% of the snaps in a game against SF Austin. So now in a game where, they're going to probably be behind, there's a bad running script. I don't think necessarily they're going to rely on Watson to throw 50 times. I think that Vidal is going to have to be able to get the running game going to at least open that up. And I think he'll end up catching a lot of, short routage type stuff. So that 2 for 54 is nice. I think that could potentially turn into a 5-6 catch, game here against K-State. So I like Vidal a lot. He's also pretty cheap overall. I'm not sure a lot of people will look to him, even though, sub 6K for his usage is pretty nice. I think a lot of people will look at it and say, oh, bad game script and kind of be a little simpleton about that. But the 5.9 for me is relatively cheap enough to go for him. And that kind of shows you the last game with Kishal Boutin, who's 5'6", only 300 more for Vidal for guaranteed usage. I'm definitely going to go there, and it's going to be hard for me not to want to use him in my main. It might be the wrong decision, but I believe in that usage that we saw. I know it's one game, but I kept saying this in the Discord the other day. We don't have the luxury of the 150 plus games in MLB. We have to make these decisions quickly, and Vidal, looking at it, he's going to get a lot of touches. As far as receivers go for Troy, if I'm not liking Watson, it's going to be tough to go there. Jabre Barber did lead all receivers in snaps with 34, which put him right around 55%. Nobody really stood out in that last game. It really was the Vidal show throughout. For K-State, you start at Will Howard, who's still pretty much, even though he's almost 9K, a pretty underrated DFS asset, pretty surgical. I have in my notes that he had a really surgical performance, almost 300 yards, total of 4 touchdowns, 2 passing, 1 rushing, and 1 receiving. So he did a little bit of everything for K-State there on the trick play. Can even catch the ball if it comes down to it. The 9K price, it's a pretty tough pill to swallow. I don't hate the idea of using him at what I would assume is low ownership because I don't see people paying that price. There's some other options, a little bit more, a little bit less, that are probably more appealing. but it wouldn't shock me to see Howard score, another 4 or 5 touchdowns. He really has control of this offense, and he looks really, really good. So barring injuries, I think he's going to be a guy that just gets habitually overlooked, and you're going to have spots where he's a GPP winner at time. The running back situation, it's DJ Giddens and it's Treshaun Ward. They're a pretty potent duo already. Could wind up being a little bit of a frustrating situation. Like you might take Giddens and Treshaun Ward scores all the touchdowns or vice versa. Giddens did to me, and I mentioned this in the write-up, I felt like he was more of the Deuce Vaughn replacement. Did rush for 128 yards on 15 carries, but it was Ward who scored the touchdown, but also rushed for 56 yards on 11 carries. So a pretty similar workload in that regard. Giddens did play 49% of the snaps while Ward played 38%, so a little bit more for Giddens there. And like I said, watching that game or seeing highlights, whatever it is that you get a chance to do, he definitely looks like he could mirror more of what we're used to seeing out of Deuce Vaughn there, especially if he can add some receptions to his game. But Giddens is fast. He's really, really fast, and he can rack up yardage in a hurry. So I'm definitely a fan of his, and I think he's a great GPP play overall in this situation. Receivers, they're pretty crowded. RJ Garcia, Ben Sano, Phillip Brooks, and Jadon Jackson. Those are the primary 4 guys. Garcia had a really big game, 5 catches for 119 and 1. I'm not too interested in that. I could easily see that being like Phillip Brooks this week has 100 yards, kind of like last year, up and down production for those K-State receivers. We typically tried to keep our usage or our exposure to the running backs, and I really think that's going to be the case again this year between whoever's cheapest between Giddens and Ward on a game-to-game basis. There will be times where, yes, one of these wide receivers, wins us GPP or something like that, but I'm rarely ever going to be using them in your main lineup because they have just as good an opportunity to give you a 5 as they do a 30. So that's kind of where my head is at there. I'm looking mainly at the running backs, adding Giddens and Waddell to my player pool of running backs that I'll have to whittle down to 3, or if I want to get cute and go 4 this week. I'm just not sure yet, Jake. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love the split, but there's so many running back splits that it's hard to say like, oh, I don't love the running back split because you're almost going to get everyone in that scenario. And I probably would, if choosing between those two, probably side more with Giddens. I'm pretty on Sano. 4,500. That's that Nick Nash price point, right? Where you can see a lot of targets and you maybe get in the end zone a time or two. And him being, a tight end in their actual offense, even though obviously we list as a wide receiver for DFS purposes, maybe stays on the field a little bit more and doesn't participate in wide receiver rotations the same way the wide receivers might. And definitely has shown some ability to be a red zone target in the past. And so I think if I'm trying to pull deep from the wide receiver group, that's probably where I'm going, and not having to spend up to the 6'3" or the 5'8" with Brooks and Garcia. So still get some exposure to the offense, but not have to pay too much of a premium for doing so. That's probably the route I would go if going to the passing game and Giddens in the running game. I don't know that I'm getting to Howard the same way that you are. I get the efficiency and the surgical nature of it, but I also don't know that they're gonna have to throw a ton. But they also didn't have to throw a ton the last game, and they still were busting out trick plays and whatnot. So who knows? Maybe they want to show all the tricks early. It'd be a little unconventional, but we've seen crazier things happen. Probably just a no for me from this guy.
Yeah, like I said, every time we sleep on Howard, he has those GPP ham games. So it's not as if he's going into my main lineup, but if I'm doing a major GPP lineup with upside, he's definitely there. But I agree. He's a scary player sometimes when he's out there catching passes, running plays, all that stuff. He's crazy. K-State quarterbacks, man. I don't know what it is. All right, so moving right along here, we have a at least for me, exposure game looking at it right now. And there's some ugly games on this slate, truly, like Iowa State, and I get it. I actually feel like I could find something there. We have this Utah-Baylor game. Utah 8-point favorites, a 47 total, which is kind of high for what this game might be. Baylor's defense looked absolutely awful. I guess theoretically Utah offense might be kind of tasty here, but I don't know, man. This game really feels ugly to me. What'd you find out?
So I don't understand this line at all. Baylor's defense looks like trash. They lost. Yes, like a backup quarterback had to come in, but like they lost what was an extremely inexcusable loss to Texas State, right? Like that's not a game that you should lose. That's not a game that should be close. Like you're a Power 5 team. Come on. And so Utah, on the other hand, beat Florida with a backup quarterback. And they actually do have a pretty good defense. They held Florida to 11 points. And it's not like Florida is this dominant offense, but you'd think that they'd probably score more than 11 points against most people. And I don't see why this isn't like a 23-point spread. Like this is like I see Utah coming in here absolutely steamrolling Baylor. Baylor does nothing on offense. And that's not to say that I think Utah is going to have this fantastic offensive output. Far from it. Even if we get Cam Rising back, which I don't think we will, they're still going to be not quite hitting on all cylinders. And more importantly, they're going to be spreading the running back touches through, 4 different backs at best. And they've got like 73 tight ends that they're going to throw to, and each of them are going to get 2 catches for 17 yards. Bunny Parks is going to have 1 play for 65 yards and do nothing else for the rest of the game. It's not a super DFS friendly game, but it's an extremely friendly betting game from the way that I'm seeing it. I don't see how Baylor sticks with Utah at all in terms of time of possession. I think eventually attrition and just being tired, keeping the defense out on the field, Utah's going to put up some points. That said, I have no idea who's going to score those points on the Utah offense. I will say if we get Kuthi back, regardless of who's at quarterback, Kuthi at 3.7 is just all kinds of alarm bells for me in terms of a guy that I want to have a lot of exposure to, just, his history with the program and his familiarity, especially if Rising is back, with being the guy that is looked to early and often and open and in the end zone. Like that seems like a play that we should have a lot of exposure to if we get confirmation that Kuthi is healthy and, not like give it a go healthy, but 100% locked in, got in, a full practice today, or we think that he's going to be out there for the majority of snaps. That's somebody I definitely want exposure to, but outside of him, or if he's not playing, I don't know where to go on this Utah offense, and maybe you sprinkle some pass catchers in here and there just to have exposure to some of it, but I don't trust it at all. And I also don't trust the quarterback to have a particularly good day, because they could hand off 40 times to 6 different backs. So I want to find a good DFS spot. I'm not quite there yet until we know maybe there's some folks that aren't going to be healthy for this one that we don't know about yet. Maybe it concentrates the offense a little bit more. But other than Kuthi, I'm not super interested in anyone.
Yeah, Brand Kuthi is a show brand play too. We've been using him for years before last season when he had that 3 touchdown, 4 catch, and then got hurt kind of thing. But if he were to play, definitely have interest. Like you said, the running backs for Baylor are super cheap, but I absolutely do not favor. I don't ever hate or dislike a player necessarily, but Richard Reese is someone that I don't favor too much. We were trying to fade him at times last year, and of course he was super chalky and he did his thing. And I also don't favor Dom Richardson because he had a big game for Oklahoma State when he shouldn't have. They had like 4 backs available. So I don't really favor either of their backs, but they're both under 5K. Dom Richardson, if he's getting these 20-plus touches, whether it's catches, carries at 4.3, perhaps he's somewhat interesting. But, yeah, this Baylor offense, their defense especially,
I just see them going 3 and out like probably 60% of the time.
Yeah, and it might be 2 yards for him here, 4 yards for him here, and yeah, it's not great. Drake Dabney, who had a big game, he's sitting there at 4K. They're going to throw the ball to him a bunch of times. So there are some cheap plays here on Baylor, but they definitely have that feel of trap as trap as a 4K play can be, I suppose. And as far as Utah's running game goes, I know Jaquin and Jackson, he had some ownership, actually some pretty deep ownership on that Utah slate. I'm never that comfortable with Utah backs. I haven't been for a couple of years now. They've churned out some really big fantasy performers, through 2019, 2021, and they could take it too early from us, but they just have so many backs that they pull out of nowhere. And I know trending into this week with Jackson banged up that there's going to be people on Micah Bernard, and we're going to get a lot of questions. Number one, he's 6.1K, so we're not even getting a real big discount on him. Number two, Jalen Glover is there, ready to kite touchdown, red zone carries and steal touchdowns. And it's just going to be that situation where there's no winning it, because whoever you don't take from that Utah running game, they're going to end up being the ones to score a touchdown or play really, really well. Or perhaps, Nate Johnson comes in there and rushes for some touchdowns. But there's just too much to go wrong here for this backfield. Even if Jaquin and Jackson doesn't play, there's volume and there's going to be a good game script, if you will, for them. But I just want to warn people now. Hopefully the rest of the industry makes that mistake and we can move forward and not have to use Utah running backs, because it is usually a losing proposition. All right, moving on here, we have a game that is going to be the DFS game of the week. Now, again, I mentioned Colorado, the ownership. When we talked about this game, TCU, we were more on the TCU side because we knew Colorado's defense wasn't going to be that improved. We like Sanders a little bit for GPPs. We thought he was going to be a little bit higher owned. He wasn't. Hunter wasn't that highly owned, and all of them actually kind of skidded by without being too highly owned, except for maybe Monty Bailey. The game blew up, of course, and now everybody's going to be chasing it. Colorado's 3-point favorites. The total is 59.5. Very, very huge performance from that Colorado offense. I mean, Jesus, it was wild. Had some debate with some people about, Heisman. Travis Hunter jumped up, significantly in the Heisman odds. And I get it. He's playing defense as well. He had an interception and he had a big game. And we'll go through these numbers right now. He led the team in targets with 14, 11 catches, 119 yards. No touchdowns, but he did just miss on 2 passes that would have been long touchdowns, potentially a 13 for 202 day. Of course, his coach, prime time said that he would have been the Heisman right then and there. I don't believe that he's going to continue at this pace with this many snaps. That's tough to play at that kind of level on both offense and defense, and especially as they get into some harder opponents. I'm not a Travis Hunter hater by any means, but if the offense continues at this pace, like people are saying, wouldn't Shedeur Sanders just be the Heisman? That's my take on it. I love Sanders. If they're going to turn him loose and allow him to throw the ball like that, it's going to be really, really hard not to be interested. Now, he does jump from 7K to 9.4, so that is a huge price increase. Certainly have to be interested, though. He completed 81% of his passes. Now, usually if you see a percentage over 70 of completions, you're looking at 22 passes, right? 25 maybe. He threw 47 times, completed 81% of them. And they were really, really nice throws and simple throws, too. I mean, they had a couple that were, wow, I can't believe this kid made that throw. But there was a lot of times they were just put in a position to make a solid throw and let the receivers make a play, and they did. 510 yards, 4 touchdowns. He doesn't offer anything in terms of rushing upside, so the price over 9K does get a little tough. But if that's going to be the normal passing volume, and there's a potential for it to be so until Alton McCaskill's healthy, which I'll talk about him in a second, then Sanders has to be considered in your lineups or in your player pool at the very least, because that's just ridiculous. Now, you did mention Dylan Edwards was a player that we didn't really talk about in the last week, and maybe we should have. TCU's defense last year was quite good, especially from their secondary standpoint. Running backs, maybe they didn't do as good a job on. But it wasn't as if Dylan Edwards got it done on the ground, right? He had 6 carries for 24 yards. Now, he did score a touchdown on the ground, but he went absolutely ape in terms of his receiver. Caught 5 of his targets, all 5 of them, 135 yards, 3 touchdowns. So the kid scored 4 times. 3 as a receiver, 1 as a running back. So yeah, Edwards went absolutely ape. There wasn't, the passing volume was crazy. So I don't feel bad about missing that play personally, just because, take out the passing there, and it was kind of a mediocre day. So Savion Wilkerson, who has, experience knowing Dion from Jackson State, he rushed for 45 yards, a touchdown, 13 carries. He got a little bit more volume. You can expect Wilkerson to factor in a little bit more and Edwards to still be out there as long as Alton McCaskill is out. He's been very, very limited. They do call him close. But as in this moment, I would consider him highly questionable to play for the Nebraska game. If he were to play, I'd be super interested at 4.8, especially if they're going to incorporate their running backs in the passing game like that. McCaskill, we know from his time with Houston when he's healthy, he can put up a lot of points very, very fast. So I like him at 4.8 if he were to be starting, but I think they might not be uber inclined to get him out there and risk further injury or re-aggravation if the offense is humming along. So stay tuned on McCaskill. We'll have a little bit more information as we roll into Saturday morning. Now with the receivers, minus Dylan Edwards, massive show, and Travis Hunter, you have two guys in the transfer portal who came over that were really, really, productive at their old school in UTEP. And they were really, really good for Sanders in Colorado. Jimmy Horn, who caught 11 of his 13 targets for 117 yards, also a touchdown. And Xavier Weaver, who is somebody I really like, typically probably my favorite on this receiver room, caught 6 of his 8 targets for 118 yards. Now, he didn't catch any touchdowns, so, I guess he had the bust of the day considering what everybody else did. But still really, really good volume. And the fact that he threw for 500 yards, it really wasn't spread out. It was super concentrated amongst those 3 receivers and Dylan Edwards. So you're looking at price hikes for all of them, of course. Hunter sitting there at $7K. I would expect a lot of people to be chasing it and prioritizing him because that's, Heisman chatter. It's fun to do. Casuals are going to know who he is. Jimmy Horn sitting there at 7.4. He's, scored, had a big game, had a lot of targets. He'll probably be right behind Hunter. And then you have Xavier Weaver, who's right wedged in the middle. We typically see the cheapest guy, who's Hunter in this case, be highly owned. And then the higher price guy who had a lot of production be semi-highly owned. It's usually that middle guy. We used to do this on UTSA last year when they had, Franklin and DeCorian Clark and all those guys. We usually try to take the middle price guy because he would be the lowest owned of the 3. So I could see Xavier Weaver being the sub 15% at 7.2 and the best way to get exposure to a popular game without having to be super chalky. So Xavier Weaver is somebody that I'm definitely looking at pretty high at that 7.2 price. Now I do like Allie Jennings, who I just mentioned when you were talking about the Virginia Tech game, and I'm not necessarily against paying up for 2 wide receivers, but it's definitely not my primary style when I'm building lineups. So I am going to have to really consider my options here with the way I build. But when you look at Weaver, for USF, over 700 yards in back-to-back years, over 90 catches in the last 2 years, 8 touchdowns. He's just a really, really solid guy and somebody that I think is going to have a big year. Hunter's going to get all this chatter, but do not sleep on Xavier Weaver there at 7.2. So that's kind of where my head's at there, taking one of them, but I'll see. There's going to be a ton of stacks that we're staring at here. And I'm curious to see if Dylan Edwards ends up having the ownership that maybe we would expect as well, because if people are going to go Hunter in droves, they're probably not paying that 6.5 price for Edwards. I wish they would have priced him maybe at 7.5 instead. 6.5 is still cheap enough to where people might feel inclined. But if anything, I might be liking me a little bit of Savion Wilkerson at 4K, especially if he's looking at 10-plus touches again, because he's probably going to score. He's going to get, a little bit of work there maybe in the passing game and can do just enough in this high-flying offense. At least we think it's going to be a high-flying offense at that 4K price. Of course, if Alton McCaskill can't go. So that's something we have to stay tuned for. On the Nebraska side, Jeff Sims is Jeff Sims. So I want to lead with that. He's a guy who has never been consistent. He's never been a accurate thrower necessarily. He's very good as a dual threat, can use his legs. He's sitting there at 7.2, which is going to be, I think, talked about a lot because we're going to want to target 4 and we're going to want to target against Colorado. So I could see Jeff Sims having that QB2, super flex, like 50% ownership in single entry high dollar. In large field, maybe that's more like 30-35%, but it's still going to be really high on Jeff Sims. And like I said, you really have to remember who you're dealing with here when you're talking about a guy like Jeff Sims. He completed only 11 of his 19 throws against Minnesota for 114 yards, a touchdown. He was picked off 3 times. One of them was the receiver fault. The other 2 was absolute no business trying to make those throws. I don't know what he was doing. It was Jeff Sims in action. He did rush for 91 yards though, and that's, like I said, the most alluring part of his game. He could potentially rush for 100 yards and 2 scores as a runner here and pay off that 7.2 price. So the fade of a chalkier Jeff Sims is risky. But as a passer, I just don't see him doing it. And we did see Chandler Morris had some success as a running quarterback against Colorado last week, did score a rushing touchdown. So Sims is certainly somebody we're going to have to consider. I don't like rostering guys just because they're going to be highly owned, but Sims is going to be one that in high dollar and cash and single entry, I'll have to be put to the test there and really over the next couple of days decide on how I want to approach that. The Huskers running back group is very unappealing. Ramir Johnson is the guy that we both liked and talked up heading into, I believe it was last year, as a slot, part-time slot guy, running back, a la Hawaii type running back. Just hasn't worked out. They haven't been giving the touches. Anthony Grant really took off. Gabe Irvin's been getting some work. So there's really nothing there with the running game that I like, especially with Ramir getting more wide receiver work typically. And then you have Jeff Sims into the mix where he's going to be stealing carries and calling his own number at the goal line too. So Nebraska running backs, not for me, even though the Colorado rush defense is not going to be very good either. It's going to be ultimately just as bad as their secondary. And we saw Monty Bailey pretty much found the holes anytime he wanted and rush for a big game. I just don't know that Nebraska has that type of running back right now. As far as the receivers go, Alex Bullock, when I saw his stat line of 356 and 1, caught all 3 of his targets, I thought, well, that must be a blip. Like, he's probably got some second half stuff. Where did this come from? And dug into it a little bit more. Looked at the snaps. He actually played 75% of the snaps. So not a blip because he's on the field a lot. It looks like Sims is going to be looking to get him the ball too. I'm really high on Isaiah Garcia Castaneda as a deep ball threat. He did play 66% of the snaps, but he was targeted 5 times. So he did have targets, but he only caught 1 of those for 7 yards because Jeff Sims just 2 of the interceptions were to IGC, unfortunately. Billy Kemp played 55% of the snaps. I was personally thinking that if you wanted a Nebraska guy, it was him. Did play over 50% of the snaps, but 2 targets, 0 catches, not great. The tight end, Nate Borkircher, had 50% of the snaps, 1 catch on 1 target, 4 yards. And then Marcus Washington, 36% of the snaps, lowest of the group, 3 catches on 4 targets for 31 yards. I look at the prices for Nebraska receivers, and I think that with the way people's brains are wired from the NFL, if you stack a team like Colorado, you need to have a run back. Like, that's just something that I know they have to have in NFL, not necessarily in college all the time, but it's good to have. And I look at, Billy Kemp at 5K, just burn people. They're probably not going there. I don't think anyone besides us and maybe a handful of other people know who Garcia Castaneda even is. And then you look at the Alex Bullock kid. People are probably going to overlook that unless they're going to game log chase. That really leaves you with Marcus Washington as the known name here at 4.5K. So if I had to pick on somebody that is going to be a relatively popular option for Nebraska as that primary run back, if you will, it's probably Marcus Washington at 4.5, just because I think Billy Kemp is out because he burned people, and I don't think anyone really knows anybody else in that Nebraska receiver room except for a handful of options. So Marcus Washington could end up being popular, but I'm really looking at the Bullock kid. 4.9, I would have preferred him to be a little bit cheaper, of course, something like 3.5, but that would have put more eyes on him. But don't sleep on the fact that he played 75% of the snaps, clearly a part of the offense and somebody that Sims was looking to. And the only bit of success he had in that game was throwing the football to Alex Bullock. So we'll see if that continues, but Colorado, Nebraska, a lot of ways to go here. Perhaps we've identified some ways to find lower owned options in a popular game. What do you do with this, man? Are you just follow suit with the industry and just pack in 4 guys, or what do you kind of try to do with this one?
So first thing, kind of touching on what I was saying earlier with Burks and Rondale Moore from Purdue. It feels like we are back in the days of Adrian Martinez, where we have a mobile quarterback at Nebraska, and it's either going to go extremely well for him or it's going to be terrible and he probably ends up getting benched. Like those are the outcomes for Jeff Sims, right? And I have love for Jeff Sims. Jeff Sims was responsible for my largest CFB win in the history of me playing CFB. Back they were playing Florida State several years ago, and back when he was still at Georgia Tech. And man, Jeff Sims has been around a long time, but there's like just no in between. Like this could be easily a 100-yard rushing, 3 touchdown rushing game for Jeff Sims, and he goes absolutely bonkers. Or this could be just a complete abhorrent disaster and he throws 5 picks and gets benched. And I don't really see much middle ground happening for him, which is exactly how I've always felt about every Adrian Martinez game. And so what I would say is this is another game that I want to either stack up completely or leave nobody in this game in any of my other lineups. I don't want like just one piece from this game messing up any other lineups, because I also think that with the kind of hype that Colorado had, and as bad as Nebraska played and as tough as that loss was against Minnesota, like these teams are just in such complete opposite emotional directions. Like there's the jubilance and earned confidence to a degree that Colorado now has after they won their one game. And then there's, the anger and dismay of a Matt Rule led team that can lead to just like some ugly football, muddying everything up the following week. And so I think if I had to take a lean on it, I'm probably staying away from this game, which is probably a pretty contrarian thing to do. Like everyone, it is a high total. Everyone is very excited about this Colorado team. I'm excited about the Colorado team too, but I think that this is like a huge letdown spot for them, right? Like they are coming off their Super Bowl in game one, and they're going to play a tough defense. Like Nebraska showed out on defense. Yes, they were up against a Minnesota team that doesn't necessarily have the most explosive offense, but they very much limited what Sean Tyler was able to do and what the passing game was able to do. And I think that they're going to get a lot more pressure on Sanders. Actually, and another good point is there was no tape of this Colorado team. It didn't exist, right? Like that team had never played together before in that particular way because there were so many portal guys. And now there is tape. There's a little bit more, of a known quantity of what this offense is going to try to do. And I think that gets exploited to a degree that it wasn't possible to be exploited by TCU. So the I guess counterfactual to that is that Shedeur Sanders is now the best QB that's ever lived and is going to throw for 500 yards and complete 80% of his passes every game. And I don't think that's realistic. And so I think this is probably a letdown spot for Colorado, probably a letdown spot from a DFS perspective. And I will not be overly exposed to this game other than the hedge lineups that, will go with the masses and say, okay, yeah, this is going to happen exactly like everyone thinks, but let's try to have all the pieces that, people aren't thinking about, like your Xavier Weavers, on the other side of your Jeff Sims. And so I just, it's a hedgy thing to say, but I either want all of it or I want none of it in any individual lineup. Just because I think there's a lot of paths to most of the players in these, especially on the Colorado side, underwhelming based on expectations and prices that are very much inflated from their unsustainable performance in week one.
Yeah, and that's just it. I don't, you're speaking like a contrarian, and that's usually my thing, but we match well in that. And that's why I'm so interested in Weaver for, the same reasons, because we know there's going to be high ownership. And I can't remember who I was arguing with about it now, but I was just saying like, okay, Hunter's going to get, 110 plus receiving yards every game, and the offense is going to be humming along. Well, then Sanders should just be the Heisman because he's going to throw for 500 plus yards a game. And like you just said, that's not probably going to happen. And there's just very little chance of 4 different guys having 100 plus yards again in this game. Nebraska, as down as they're feeling after another blown lead, which is kind of the Nebraska trademark, they gave it to Mr. Fumbler Anthony Grant there, and he fumbled it away. But this it seems way too easy to just stack up Colorado and call it a day. So it gives me a little bit more confidence to continue to talk that, because I know we're going to be one of the few people in the industry that are even suggesting that. But at this point, yeah, I'm looking at Weaver and trying to find ways out of rostering Jeff Sims. So we'll see if I'm successful and end up doing that here at the end. All right, moving along, we have Eastern Kentucky versus Kentucky, and this gives you an opportunity to talk about your guy here. He's officially moved on to your guy and Ray Davis, who I've loved since Temple. I thought he had a lot of potential there, and he's still somehow in college. Speaking of a guy in a long time, 7+ years, and it's not that long, but it feels like it. Coming off a huge game, which you pretty much predicted. So what, you going back to Ray Davis, and what else do you like in a game that's a probable blowout?
Yeah. So he did what he did on 14 carries. And he also caught 3 passes, which is not necessarily something I expected him to do a lot of, because they have enough pass catching weapons out, without him having to do it out of the backfield. But I think he's pretty clearly the dude. First half, he was getting the bulk of carries, didn't really start ceding much work to Utah McLean until the second half. And Demi got maybe 3 carries or something. They didn't see the ball much. Actually, no carries for Demi. Only was involved in the passing game. So it was really just Ray Davis and Utah McLean. And I think, he has a chance to be even more explosive. He averaged 8 yards a carry. So it's not like he was, plugging along at 4 yards a carry and got there on 30 carries. He was plenty efficient, 14 for 112 and 2 touchdowns. And even that, I think, could have been better. I mean, I think they had a defensive score, scored quickly on offense a number of times. And so I'm very much going back to the well if we can find a space for him. I know we like some cheap running backs. We both mentioned Kalen Black from JMU, and there's a guy that we'll talk about later in one of the later games on the slate that I also very much am into at a very much reduced price point relative to expectation. But if we can find a spot for Ray Davis in the running back rotation, I'm very much into that. Even at 7,700, yes, the price point is up slightly, but one more touchdown is very possible. 30 more yards is very possible. I see him easily eclipsing that 100-yard bonus, and you really want to get 102 at that price point, and I think he's probably one of the more likely guys to have enough of a floor of volume that 102 is within his reasonable expectations, as opposed to it being a ceiling game for him. So I'm excited about him again. I don't know that he's my lock play the way that he was last week, but I am definitely going back to the well. And then just to touch on the passing game too, they were pretty efficient from that perspective. Didn't really miss a beat. Coming out of the Will Levis era and coming into the Devin Leary era. One might even make the argument they were a little bit more efficient in the Devin Leary era than they were with Levis. And it was exactly who we thought. Berrien Brown and Dane Key were both on point. Dane Key got in the end zone. Berrien Brown did not get in the end zone, but still had enough volume to be dangerous, and so could go either way. The guy that didn't get much work was Tavian Robinson, and it was just kind of like they didn't really need him to do much with the ground game running the way that it did and them scoring efficiently, and Dane Key being the one that actually did get in the end zone. So if we want to go with that same theory of middle ground receiver, mid-priced receiver might be the least owned option, sitting there at 4,800. That's a pretty enticing price for Tavian Robinson, but at the same time, Dane Key's even less and probably has a little bit more solidified of a floor volume. If I were pricing these receivers, I'd have Dane Key at 63. Berrien Brown probably right where he is, and Tavian Robinson probably closer to 51 or 52. So it's really hard to get away from Dane Key at 47. So the the one caveat to that would be probably not, because I don't really expect Eastern Kentucky to come back with much on offense or keep this game competitive enough to the point where multiple Kentucky running backs and wide receivers are going to get there. So probably pick a lane between Ray Davis and Dane Key, but or whichever Kentucky wide receiver you choose. But one of those dudes is going to ball out. And so it's just kind of how you want to mix and match things and probably not pair them together, but mix and match them so that you have exposure to multiple different aspects of that offense. I would even, if you didn't do a Ray Davis, I would even get into Devin Leary at 83. I could see it, saying, okay, we ran the ball a good amount last game. You didn't have the most efficient day. Let's air it out a little bit and build up your confidence before we start getting into conference play. Pretty terrible defense all the way around. So it's just kind of up to how the offensive coordinator decides he wants to score points, but points will absolutely be scored by Kentucky. And I think they'll be hitting on all cylinders. Sure, it's like a 36-point spread or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty damn high. It's, what is it? 31.5 right now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that actually seemed a little bit low, but I easily see them doing that and winning comfortably and, doing everything that they want to do on offense and not really struggling. So get pieces of the Kentucky offense, just get, ones that are intelligent and make sense together and correlate well as opposed to correlating negatively.
Yeah, and there's too much value as the guy that really preaches cheap receivers, there's just too much. And then we have two really cheap running backs. One we've already talked about, one we're going to talk about. And it's like, damn, I'm starting to feel like, where am I going to spend this money at? I might have to overpay for a quarterback here because Dane Key at 4.7 is going to be hard to get away from. He was really, really good as a freshman. Not a superstar, but 40 catches, almost 400 yards, something like that, scored a bunch. Really quite good in that first performance, 5 of 8 targets for 96 yards and a touchdown. Tavian Robinson, you mentioned, didn't do a lot. He'd be the one to go to because I do think Key at 4.7 will see a nice ownership spike. Tavian will not. And for 100 more, you can get, likely a 25% difference in rostership. So I do like that for GPPs. I love the fact that Ray Davis was targeted in the passing game 5 times. You'd mentioned that's not something we're usually accustomed to with him, at least lately. And that 5 targets in the passing game, if that's like a 2 to 5 target thing going forward, that just adds to his overall value of getting what we know is going to be 20 plus carries. So I certainly like that, and we're going to have some money to spend here. So Ray Davis at 7.7 might be a guy to spend some money on. And looking at the overall slate here, we still have more games to talk about. I feel like Davis and Key are going to see ownership here, especially against a lowly EKU team. So we'll see how that shakes out there, because it's pretty hard to somebody asked me about how to project ownership in college football, and it's really difficult. Pretty much just have to look at prices, try to talk to people around the industry, and do your best guess. But I feel like those two will be relatively popular, all things considering. All right, so moving on to the Texas A&M versus Miami game. Pull up the odds real quick. Texas A&M 3.5-point favorites, total of 51. The Aggies were on one of the later slates, I believe it was, and I was super high on Anais Smith because he was like damn near min price. Nobody was on him. Didn't get the blow-up game that I was really hoping for. He was targeted 3 times, caught all 3 of those for 40 yards. I'm going to start with the passing game here of Texas A&M, and did play 41% of the snaps. He was kind of still ginger and not fully 100%, so that had probably something to do with it. But I do like him long-term in this offense, and I think he's going to be just fine. I do feel like people might be tempted to chase, a Noah Thomas, who caught all 6 of his targets for 74 yards and 3 touchdowns, played 66% of the snaps as a tight end there, so he's on the field a lot. Evan Stewart played 57% of the snaps, caught 8 passes for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns on 10 targets. And then Jade Walker caught 3 of his 6 targets for 31 yards. That's the main pass catching group from game 1 there. I still, like I said, really do like Ainias Smith. I feel like people are going to kind of gloss over him. His price did jump up to 5.5, so it's not as an advantageous price. But you look at Noah Thomas at 6.1 a week ago, that would have been totally ludicrous. And Evan Stewart at 7.1, which we are going to have salary to spend. And the Miami defense, I think, is going to be good, but maybe not great. So you can definitely target some of these guys for GPPs. But Ainias Smith is the one I want to continue to go to. He's not a main team play for me this week, but I am going to have some GPP exposure there for him just because I know nobody will be on him. And we've seen him in the past put up some big numbers when healthy. The running game is a no-go. They're cheap. Ruben Owens, Amari Daniels, Le'Veon Moss, David Bailey. Is the ghost of David Bailey somewhere there? I don't think so. But they're just, all going to cannibalize each other. It's going to be really tough to on a game-to-game basis use anyone. Daniels looks really electric if they end up giving him more touches going forward. But that's going to be a wait and see type of situation for me. So it's really just if you want to pay $9K, which will have the salary for Connor Wegman, who did have a really nice game, 5 touchdown passes, really, really solid. Paying $9K for him is a decision that I wouldn't make, lightly by any means, but certainly with the backfield kind of being in chaos right now, I think they're going to lean on Connor a lot. He's certainly got the pass catching options around him that he's going to be successful one way or another. So I don't hate that. On the Miami side, I don't. It's funny because 2 years ago, I wanted the Seahawks to draft Tyler Van Dyke coming out. I thought, well, this guy can be the quarterback of the future. And, injuries later and being banged up and inefficient play, and now it's like his stock is just in the toilet, and I have no interest in using him for DFS purposes against the Aggies either. The running back room, similar situation as it is for Texas A&M. It's completely crowded. We thought not for any real serious main team plays, but Henry Parrish seemed like, okay, this is the most main team viable guy. Don Chaney was, scoring a bunch. Mark Fletcher got some looks. So there was just too many touches for multiple guys there. And to pay 7.2 for Parrish, knowing that he might not be getting, 80% of the carries makes it pretty difficult for me to really pay that price. So I would move right along to the wide receivers for Miami, where I love Colby Young, sitting there at 5.9. He was really, really good. And the first half quarter, he just exploded for Miami. Had majority of his production, ended up with 4 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown, ended up on the bike and banged up and missed like almost all of the second quarter and still ended up with 18 fantasy points. Would have had a much bigger game if he hadn't gotten banged up there. So assuming he's all good to go, free and clear at 5.9, he certainly makes sense because people at the receiver spot are either going to pay, up top there, maybe chase a Trey Harris, something like that, or a Tyron Smith, or those Colorado guys, or they're going to pay down to the Dane Keys and some of these cheaper options that we've talked about. There's not going to be a whole lot looking towards Colby Young at the 5.9 because when you glance at the box score, you might say, okay, that guy scored, his price is okay, and not really realize the situation that we were looking at there when it comes to Colby Young, who was well on his way to absolutely detonating. Did play 47% of the snaps, but again, missed most of the second quarter and was kind of in and out of the lineup from there. So all healthy, I think Colby Young's the WR1 here, above Jacoby George and above Xavier Restrepo. Restrepo did play 77% of the snaps, so on the field a lot. 6 targets, caught 5 of those for 68 yards. He's obviously going to be involved heavily in the offense. He's only 4.1, so you have another cheap option if you want. There's another good reason for playing Colby Young. He's, almost 2K more. People know the Restrepo name maybe a little bit better, and the fact of the matter is he's 4.1, getting heavy volume, especially playing over 70% of the snaps. So I could see ownership on him as well, and that's just another cheap option that you have at the receiver spot should you want it. The third option there was Jacoby George, who caught 6 of his 7 targets for 56 yards, played 71% of the snaps. I suspect a lot of that had to do with the fact that Colby Young just missed time. So the way I am looking at it, we're going to have the salary with all this value. I mean, there's just, again, too much value. I think this main slate has the potential to be stupid high scoring, which is unfortunate. I typically like those kind of more moderate scoring slates where you don't just get, 5-6X out of every spot. But this Miami passing game, despite having to go up against the Aggies, which isn't maybe the best defense to go up against, has a lot of value here for me. And I'm certainly interested in both Restrepo, who's a chalkier option, and Colby Young, who I think has something going with Tyler Van Dyke here. I just hope that he can stay healthy. I don't want to see this guy who, puts up these numbers, but he's banged up all the time. And that's something that kind of felt like a bad omen there in week 1. Before we move on to the next game, which is the most alluring of the slate, what thoughts do you have on the Miami or Texas A&M side?
Yeah, so one just kind of overarching piece to look at is we are expecting some weather for this one, and you were pretty heavily focused on both of the passing games and
yep.
Not really the running game, and that's not to say that passing games won't work out. What probably is the case is we'll see kind of lower ADOT type targets, shorter quick passes, that kind of thing, have more success. And so, especially on the Miami side, Restrepo kind of is that, slot low ADOT guy, or at least, it seemed like that's been how they've wanted to use him thus far. And so there's an argument for maybe a little bit more volume there. And then on the A&M side, they're not as good at, they're not going to do, I think, like the tendency to watch game logs and look at game logs, they're not going to do all those same things against Miami that they did against New Mexico. That's just, it's not how it works. You don't, when you have a real defense that you're going up against, when you're playing on the road in a hostile environment, now there's some weather involved too. You can't do things like have 2 receivers go for 100 yards and multiple touchdowns that. That doesn't exist in the realm of a 51 over under. And so I'm not saying that Evan Stewart's not talented. I'm not saying that Noah Thomas isn't talented. In fact, I think Noah Thomas is still fairly underpriced for what he's capable of. I just want to make sure we have reasonable expectations of what a successful game is. If you get 100 yards and 1 touchdown at 6-1, that's still a pretty good game at a receiver position where, there are a lot of guys who are going to have upside, but there's going to be a lot of flops too. That if all he gets you is 19 points or something, that's not the worst thing in the world. And so just if you fall short of that 30-point game on a receiver from this game, just know that was a lot more likely than maybe you thought it was going in. And yeah, I love the Colby Young call. I think, that's kind of been the trend. He's the Xavier Weaver model of a play, even though he is the highest priced guy. I think he's going to be the guy that maybe people are off on the Miami side. And it seems like with a lot of these games, we're very focused on the passing games, and there's not as many options on the running in the running game. So hopefully we can get to some running backs that we can count on for volume and bell cow type work. Haven't gotten there yet. Maybe we'll get there in the next game.
I don't know, man. I'm seriously considering breaking out the 4 running backs. I know we haven't talked about as many, and they're kind of maybe the slate's backloaded with these options. But yeah, this particular game is going to definitely be tricky. But me personally, I'm not getting involved with the 4-headed running backs on both sides, at least right now. I think somebody will emerge out of these backfields, but it's pretty early to expect it now. All right, let's move on to the one that everybody's been waiting for. Not Colorado, not Ole Miss, not Marshall, the underpriced kid from Marshall that maybe people have heard of, but the Iowa State game, which I think has the potential to have several DFS or betting props options coming out of here and potentially giving us some green screens. I know you might not feel the same way, but I don't know, something about this Iowa program this year. I feel they might be a little different than years past, and they kind of showed it with some passing game, artillery type options in the last one there. But obviously going up against Iowa State, that's going to be a tougher demon for them to deal with. So what did you find out about Iowa versus Iowa State?
Yeah, so I guess we'll start on the Iowa State side. So lots of gambling happened between
Yeah.
these two games, and so Rocco Becht sitting there at 5,600. Um, you rarely do you want to go up against an Iowa defense. We sometimes we would get cute with Hunter Decker's, in the Iowa State offense last year. No Xavier Hutchinson to throw to this year makes things a little bit more difficult in the Cyclone offense. And I don't know that we need to get cute there. I probably, even at that price point, don't have very much interest. Jalen Noel, I mean, yes, he is a receiver in the Iowa State offense. It's really tough, man. I think if there is interest, it's probably going to be on the on the Iowa side. We have too much committee type stuff happening. I guess Cartevious Norton is a lead back, getting 11 carries. I guess that counts as being the bell cow on Iowa State if they're splitting carries. I think you and I talked about Sama a little bit. It's flashed, and he's only at 3,300 as a running back, and so extremely deep GPP play, but really more realistically. Probably just a guy that we want to stash and keep in the back of our minds for the future. On the Iowa side, we expected big, huge, crazy things from Caleb Johnson, and ultimately we were pretty disappointed. Not for a lack of volume. Did get 19 carries. He did get some work, kind of throughout the game. It started with the heavy volume early, and we thought that we were gonna maybe see like a 25 to 28 carry game if that kept up, but didn't see that, didn't see the efficiency, didn't get there. I don't necessarily think that like the matchup is cake. I do think that Iowa is extremely stubborn and will continue to pound the rock and give him opportunities. So hopefully we see a little bit more efficiency there. If he can get in the end zone twice, that makes things look a lot better. But I'm a little bit concerned about the lack of efficiency against a team like Utah State that you should be able to just pile up, 7 or 8 yards a carry against, and he was sitting there with an average of 3 yards a carry. And if I'm the coach, that makes me think that I should hand off some of those carries to someone else, or maybe pass the ball a little bit more. And I'd love to see Caleb Johnson get there. I don't know that he makes my running back rotation. Certainly isn't like a line in the sand type play for me. I do have some interest in Luke Lachey. Iowa tight ends, going back as far as George Kittle and DJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, as recently as last year with Sam Laporta, who high draft pick, and got some work in tonight. The Lions being the Chiefs. A lot of volume for Luke Lachey. 7 catches on 9 targets for 73 yards. That could easily turn into a 100-yard game. And at only 4K, you can't play every receiver, but man, if you're gonna plug anyone in from this game, that's a heck of a lot of volume from something that this offense consistently targets. And so I think there's definitely some opportunity there. And say you get 8 catches and 100 yards, and Lachey catches the touchdown instead of Eric All this time, you're looking at a pretty amazing game for 4K. And so should that come to pass, I think he'll be under owned, especially with both of the touchdown catches going to other pass catchers last week. I think there's an opportunity to have that balance out. And that's probably as much as I can talk about Iowa versus Iowa State.
Fair enough, man. Very good. Very good. There's definitely some options, man. Cade, you know, he didn't do. I asked him to play like mediocre to allow the running game to do well, and you know, he threw the ball 30 times. That was more than I wanted him to throw or expected him to throw. Did have a couple of touchdowns, no interceptions. Was, I guess, semi above mediocre there. Did pretty well. Now, Iowa's running a lot of two tight end sets, which we kind of expected. When you look at the snap counts there, Lachey, who you like and good call out at 4K, played 81% of the snaps. Eric All, 68%. So both on the field a lot. Caleb Brown, 31%, and Deontay Vines, 55%. So we didn't see much from Caleb Brown. He is somebody I is kind of a little bit of, for me, a sneak deep GBP plays 3-5. Nobody expecting anything. Obviously, he had the high pedigree coming out of high school. COVID year, he was robbed of his like most of his senior season because I believe his team canceled the year. Didn't play much for Ohio State, but it's worth noting they recruited him. That's wide receiver U. So, you know, Brown has a very high pedigree and is going to be able to step into an opportunity here. So I do think we see him start to get used more sooner rather than later. And at 3-5, maybe he's worth, you know, throwing out into a lineup there in what I would call a throwaway lineup for sure, but potentially it works out. Otherwise, obviously the tight ends continually for Iowa tend to be pretty good. Eric All sitting there at 3.8 as well. Pretty cheap and somebody that Kate has chemistry with from previous school. Caleb Johnson at 5'8". I just, you know, I know that we didn't get the explosive game, 100 plus yards that we were expecting. Didn't quite work out. It just was a really weird game. They were passing a lot. But like I said, early on, he had a 27-yard run, and it was like, okay, here we go. He's going to get going. And he just really, you know, aside from the touchdown, he had a fumble. Things just didn't quite work out there. So maybe he wasn't quite ready for the bell cow workload that we were hoping. And obviously things don't necessarily get any easier here against Iowa State, but I do think he still sees 20 plus touches. I won't be using him in my main lineup, but this is like one of those classic spots where, and he wasn't like super high owned, but he had a chunk, but where like nobody goes back, nobody's on him. And then all of a sudden he scores 2 times where he hits that 100 plus yard mark. And it's like, damn, we should have went back to him, or why couldn't he do that the week before? Like just a classic spot. So don't be surprised if Caleb Johnson does have a big game here, but it's certainly going to be tough to do. Jalen Noel sitting there on the other side for Iowa State's really the only player I have any interest in it on their team. You and I had that conversation about the running backs, like you said. Sama there at 3.3, somebody to keep an eye on, but not playable just yet. But Jalen Noel at 4.4, I think could kind of be in that. He's in that group, you know, the sub 5K receivers that are going to be relatively popular to a degree, I think. Not super highly owned, but I feel like, you know, 15, 18, 19%, something like that. He was targeted 6 times last week. He caught 4 passes, which might sound pretty fun, but he had 6 yards. Somehow managed 6 yards on 4 receptions, which is kind of hard to do. But he did it. But he did lead the team in receptions there. Obviously, the quarterback situation is not very exciting. Not a very fun game. Let's move on. I just basically want to harp on the Caleb Johnson bounce back game there for you multi-enterers. All right, moving along here, we have Ole Miss versus Tulane, another game that could potentially rival the Colorado game, at least for popularity. It does have a higher total at 66.5. Ole Miss is a 7-point favorite. That might shock some people thinking that this Tulane team, without Tyjae Spears, who's in the NFL now, what are they going to do? But they definitely showed last week that, granted, lower tier opponent, they have the offense that can put up some points. And they have a quarterback in Michael Pratt that is, for lack of a better term, that dude. I know the kids are saying he's him. I don't want to say that. It feels awkward to say. So I'm going to just continue to say he's that dude. Really, really high on him that secondary slate last week. He was very low owned, and he played really well, and he looked comfortable. He only had to throw 15 times, but he completed 14 of those 15 for almost 300 yards, and he threw 4 touchdown passes. And just to top it off, he also rushed for about 40 yards. So still showed he has that ability to be a dual threat option. The running backs for Tulane, there's a bit of a mess there. Again, another committee backfield, which we're seeing a lot of this year. But Pratt is going to be a guy that calls his own number in the red zone. Will, if a play breaks down, he's not afraid to take off and run. And he's got the receivers and the playbook kind of mastered around him and the options around him to make good, crisp throws and allow them to make plays. You look at what his receivers did, the top 3 last week. Chris Brazell, 4 for 53 yards and a touchdown, caught all 4 of his targets. Jaquan Jackson caught 3 of his 4 targets for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had a really big play where he just made the defense look silly. And then Lawrence Keys, 4 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown for 4 targets. So his top 3 options, he kept them all happy. They all scored. They're all relatively strong plays here against Ole Miss. The Ole Miss defense, it was like 2, maybe 3 years ago where you could just target against them and they gave up like 70 a game. It was ridiculous. They're not quite that bad now, but they're definitely going to still be a secondary that gives up points. Looking at it, you look Chris Brazell is 4.1K, Lawrence Keys 6K, and then Jaquan Jackson 6.3. So you can throw another receiver under 5K, slightly above 4K in Chris Brazell. That could probably see some ownership there and is absolutely a good play. And it almost kind of seems like maybe that makes Lawrence Keys or Jaquan Jackson maybe the contrarian play because they're a little bit higher owned. But we have so much value. It seems like every game, every like DFS relevant game we've talked about has a cheap receiver we can use. And this is just another one that we can look at. So with Brazell, with some slight ownership there, I don't mind going to Keys or Jackson. I prefer Keys. I know there's the price difference is negligible, but to me in the offseason and reading reports and stuff, it seemed like Keys was kind of the guy that was going to send up the depth chart and kind of nab that alpha role. I think Jackson's just going to be that, deep play Marcus Washington type where he can break a play each game, but I think Keys is going to end up being more of a PPR viable guy. So I like him. I love Pratt. Pratt's 8.8. That's a price that may keep some people off. He's certainly in my quarterback pool. I'm going to trim that down to like 3 or 4 guys to really, decide if I'm doing, the 2 quarterback thing, 4 running back thing. But Pratt is a main team guy for me, and I'm very, very comfortable paying that 8K price or 8 price for him. Without Tyjae Spears, he's just being counted on to do a whole hell of a lot more. So I like him going right back. On the Ole Miss side, we have Jackson Dart, almost 10K, and this is where we're starting to look at, like, we have this salary available. We have to spend it somewhere. Is this where we spend it on Jackson Dart? Do we spend it on Shedeur Sanders? Like, there's really not that many high-priced guys. Brennan Armstrong, J.J. McCarthy, probably not. So I'm looking at Jackson Dart as being one of those guys that people end up paying for because they have all the salary available, and he looked obviously quite good. And he's going to be in a situation here with Tulane where it's a high total. High totals generally attract people towards ownership, obviously. 334 passing yards last week, 4 touchdowns, only 18 completions, 23 pass attempts. Hyper efficient, much like Michael Pratt was last week. Also rushed for 30 yards. He has that ability to do so. Now, Spencer Sanders was looming in the background. He was in mop-up duty. He's listed as the backup. It's publicly said. Everybody's made it clear that Spencer Sanders is the backup, but it makes very, very little sense to me why he would come to a program where he could have chosen literally 40 plus other teams to be a starter on, why he would spend his last collegiate season backing up Jackson Dart. That just doesn't compute to me. So I'm a little bit weirded out by that. He was pretty damn good actually in his mop-up duty, and clearly we know Spencer Sanders can break a slate. He can also break your team in a bad way. So, I mean, if this turns into a game where Ole Miss runs with it, then we'll see him supposedly, but I don't think they will. I think it'll be close. But still, I don't like that Spencer Sanders is in the background. I feel like they might pull a CFL. CFL, Canadian Football League, notorious for their backup quarterbacks coming in and getting rushing touchdowns at the 1 to 3 yard line. Like, that's just the thing they do there. Feel like Spencer Sanders is going to be looming and stealing touchdowns, not only from Jackson Dart, but from my guy, Quinshon Judkins, who I'm now going to talk about why you should play him in your main. Scored 20 plus fantasy points for us at a semi-low ownership last week. Less than 20 touches. It was a blowout, only 60-something yards, but he did score twice before he got the hook. Expecting a closer game here. They're going to need a lot, a lot of ball control and establishing and keeping Pratt on the sidelines as much as possible, right? So giving Judkins a high workload just makes sense. And he's been such a super efficient guy all of last year, already showed it this year with under 20 touches, 2 touchdowns. I think he's a mortal lock for 100-plus yards and 2 touchdowns. Looking at his price point, he's relatively still too cheap for his talent and what he can do. 8.1 it's up there. Thankfully, it's not like 6K or something. So it'll put people to the test if they actually want to use him. I'm okay paying 8.1. Again, usually I'm the one that wants to pay less for receivers and will pay a premium for my running backs because I have a lot of value for the position. I know our counterparts on the NFL team and everybody in the industry, NFLs don't matter. You can, they're not as important thing, but at the collegiate level, running backs are still very, very important. And we continue to be profitable with high price running backs that do us well, or even lower price running backs as well. And we've proven that with the 4 running back lineups I keep harping on. But 8-1 Quinshon Judkins, let him be low owned. I'm going right back to the well. I don't even have to worry about it. Even in blowout situations, I wasn't worried last week. He still scored 20. Would have loved more, of course. At 8-1, I need more than 20, but he's playing an opponent where the game's going to be close. So give me all the Quinshon Judkins can handle. We saw Ulysses Bentley. It's just not going to be pilfering too much work from Quinshon. It's just not going to happen. At the receiver and tight end spots, we saw an absolutely I don't even have any other way to put it but a manic game from Trey Harris. It was just absolutely insane. Targeted 9 times, which is great. 6 catches for 133 yards, but 4 of those 6 catches did result in a touchdown, which is the epitome of super efficient. Don't expect that kind of production to continue. And I'm really, really curious to see what ownership might end up being because he's not exactly cheap at 7-8. He makes you a decision between him, the Colorado guys, and you can't roster them all. There is the value to do so, but you have to make some decisions here. Sakari Franklin is a limited participant in practice. He's trending towards being doubtful. At this moment, I'd consider him highly questionable, more on the doubtful side. And we already know that Caden Prescorn, my guy from Memphis, is definitively out and will not be playing for several more weeks. So still going to be short some pass catchers, which is the reason why it led to this huge production from Trey Harris on his 9 targets. Played about 50% of the snaps. Jordan Watkins played even more, 62% of the snaps. Caught all 6 of his targets for 111 yards. And then Michael Trigg, without Prescorn, showed out a little bit. 3 catches for 44 yards, but he did play 33% of snaps and had 5 targets. So obviously being a factor there, those were the top 3 guys that really stood out as DFS-friendly options for this particular game. Now, I don't like the idea at all of chasing Trey Harris. I think, if anything, if you want to play an Ole Miss receiver, it makes way more sense to go Jordan Watkins for the discount, especially when you look at similar targets, similar receiving production. It just so happened that variance kicked in there for Harrison. He caught 4 touchdowns. Watkins caught 0. That could very easily swing the other way with Watkins scoring those 4 touchdowns. So as much as I like Trey Harris and feel like, yes, he's an elite option this week, again, especially if Franklin's not playing, but we do need to temper expectations a little bit because I don't think 50 fantasy points is something that he's going to deliver here, even in a really exciting games atmosphere here between Tulane and Ole Miss, where we can expect a lot of points to be scored. Triggs even more, interesting there at 3.7 as somebody that can certainly be rosterable. GPP wise, Dayton Wade at 3.5 is somebody you could potentially look at. There's some options here besides the Harris Watkins expensive options, but that's kind of how I'm approaching it. If I'm using one, I'm looking to Watkins. At this moment, I'm all in on Judkins and have no regrets about it. So the passing game, I'm kind of almost daring them to put up those numbers again. I think this is a Judkins game all the way. And I think Pratt is the one that I'm pairing him with on the other side, with the expectations that, yes, he's going to have to throw the football a lot because of Ole Miss, being able to score points. And if I'm pairing him with someone, it's not the more chalky or Brazil, it's Lawrence Keys, who I happen to have the salary for to pay the $6K price point for him. So that is really a long-winded, I know, but that's how I'm approaching the Ole Miss Tulane game. Curious to see if you're on board with me on Judkins because he's kind of our guy together, or if you're looking elsewhere this week.
So, yeah, he was ultra efficient last week, and I think that continues. I don't really see Tulane being able to put up a ton of resistance on the ground, and I think that it sets up for a bonkers efficient and volume kind of game for Judkins in the way that Trey Harris had it last week, and I think that that pendulum kind of swings more Judkins' way. Not to say that Judkins was bad last week. He wasn't. He didn't get the insane level of volume in a blowout the way that the Trey Harris still happened to. And so I think like you never want to like say, hey, I think this guy's going to get 200 yards and 4 touchdowns, but like, I don't know. I kind of think I kind of think you can say that here. Like he's going to be involved. He might get one of them, through the air or something. But this will be a competitive game throughout, or at least, it should be. I'm kind of projecting it to be. And so he stays involved. I would say, 25 plus touches is not out of the question, especially at the pace that I would expect this game to go. And, could he get into the end zone at least 2, probably more like 3 times with the upside of a 4th? I think that's there. I think that's within the range of outcomes. And how can you not be interested in a guy at any price that has that capability and that usage and volume that can get him there? So yeah, very much in on Judkins. I think I'm going to have the tendency to only have Pratt on the Tulane side. I'm probably not going to try to pick the receiver that gets the volume. I mean, the reality is it's either going to be Pratt running it in, or it's going to be Pratt throwing it on a long touchdown to somebody. And so I'm going to, make my line in the sand that it's going to be a different somebody each time. And we're not going to see, 3, 110 and 3 from Keys. And so, maybe that's wrong. And maybe Keys goes out there and gets all the volume, but I think it's going to be a spread it around enough type game, or maybe, some guys we haven't heard from yet from Tulane kind of step up, because Ole Miss has a good enough secondary. They can probably take one weapon away, and whoever they choose to take away, somebody else is going to have to step up, or Pratt's just going to have to run the ball a good amount. And all of those things lead me to want to use Pratt and Pratt alone. Obviously no real interest in the Tulane running game other than Pratt being able to be a little bit mobile, run the ball himself. But I think, naked Pratt and Judkins on the other side is probably the way I'm looking at it. So we're mostly in alignment on that. I'm probably not getting to Trey Harris and expecting him to have lightning in a bottle hit twice 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, and it's a good point about Tulane, because that was really concentrated in week 1, but they do have Fat Watts, who's been around the program for a while. He's dealt with the ACL, potentially coming back at any moment. And they did get the Texas A&M transfer. He didn't get used last week, but Ewell Keith Brown. So there are names in this receiver room that could pop at any time. So definitely a good call out there on the variety or high variance in Tulane's passing game. All right, moving on to the next game, UNLV versus Michigan. I absolutely whiffed Michigan's running game. I take that on the chin, but I'm very tempted to go back to it this week because it can't possibly be that terrible 2 weeks in a row. What do you think here about the Michigan side, or UNLV as well? UNLV looks awful, but maybe you got some sneaks for us there.
Don't have much on the UNLV side. I think taking any offense against Michigan, we saw it last week. Ball didn't move against the Michigan defense. That's probably going to be what happens again. Michigan offense looked a little flat. I don't know if that was missing Harbaugh, it being first game of the season, getting some jitters out, whatever the case may be. It was not like the clicking on all cylinders version of the Michigan offense that I was kind of expecting, even though they had some success, but it was more just, hey, we have a stifling defense and we're going to keep getting the ball back. And they weren't popping off like 12 yards a carry the way that you would kind of expect them to do against lower level competition like an ECU. And there's probably some more ability to do that this week, and maybe there'll be a little bit more of a well-oiled machine. But I think the biggest takeaway was that like Roman Wilson is now God, right? Like just all the touchdowns are going to go through Roman Wilson now. I don't know if you had him pegged for 3 touchdowns.
That's a brand favorite, by the way.
Yeah, that is. No, I do recall we were talking about the chemistry developing between JJ McCarthy and Roman Wilson on some deep balls, and I don't know that even we expected
No.
the 3 touchdowns to happen in week
Definitely
1.
not.
So that was super interesting. He was like, "Oh, okay, Michigan scored on a long play." I was watching a different game, didn't really see what happened. Must have been Corum or Edwards. And it turns out no, it was Roman Wilson again. And so it was that was rough to take on the chin. To just see all of that efficiency go to one guy and have it not be the guy that we were kind of both expecting it to. If you can get there, I mean, like Corum, 7 yards of carry, he was still decent. He definitely was more efficient than Edwards was, and I think Edwards, had a goal line carry, but like then ended up not being a touchdown or something like that. Saw something weird happen with Edwards where his score maybe could have been a little bit better than it was, but obviously even throwing an extra touchdown to him, like getting another touchdown on the stat line would have been a disappointment. And so pretty high price on Corum, a little bit less so on Edwards. I still think that Corum is probably the more likely of the two to explode in this one, just because okay, one game is getting the rust off. They got to really get him rolling before, the schedule gets a little bit tougher. And so this could be an opportunity to do that. And I Roman Wilson had his day, but I don't think that he's going to get all of those touchdowns again. And I think that there will be a concerted effort to get Corum become kind of the bowling ball that we've known him to be in the past. And so last week I was kind of on Edwards for the discount and his ability to break an explosive play. This week, I think if choosing between the two, I'm going to lean towards they're going to, want to get some lather on Corum and let him break loose a few times and punch it in. So 102 is what he would need to get there and be a back of relevance at that price. And, I think we're going to see a lot less ownership on him because of Judkins and to a lesser degree Davis being similarly priced. And I think there's, just as much upside for him to have kind of a crazy game, but the difference is he's going to have to do it all in the first half, and he's going to have to get in the end zone, a number of times early for him to have a shot at it. So, yeah, I think if you're using anyone from this game, it's probably one of the two running backs. I would probably lean Corum if you can get there on the price. Been able to save a lot of money a lot of other places, so maybe that's a place where you kind of guarantee yourself some floor and hope he gets in the end zone multiple times early and get some upside as well.
Yeah, I like that because I if anything, I would think that people, if they're going to go to Michigan and use somebody, that they might look for that discount because it is pretty significant for Edwards, knowing, hey, that the volume was still there. He got targeted 4 times in the passing game, had 12 carries. So I like that. Almost kind of feels contrarian call to Corum because, like you said, we have the salary to use. And now you're starting to see it take shape. The running back pool is kind of, for me, it's ballooning a little bit, and we haven't even got to the most obvious number one most highly owned running back on the slate yet. Starting to feel like a one quarterback lineup kind of day, but I like that call. Yeah, for sure. And Roman Wilson, I wasn't trying to take credit for him having a big day because I didn't really talk about him last week, but last year we were high on him quite often and kind of saw the future that he might have. So certainly never saw him getting 3 touchdowns in that particular game, but it was nice to see. Super talented. You still saw, Corny Johnson, he got the targets and did some things, average 14 yards per reception. So he was really good. The kid that I really was kind of talking about in the preview shows I did over the summer, Colston Loveland, who really has no other tight end now with all gone to, and other guys in the NFL to share tight end snaps with. He was targeted 4 times, caught all 4 of those for 57 yards. So I still want to kind of continue to bring up that name of Colston Loveland to people to at least stash it away for later. He is 4-1. He's a GPP play, obviously, but as pricing starts to tighten and we need cheaper guys. Loveland's one of those maybe Jatavian Sanders types where not a lot of people know who he is yet that we'll be able to use, but he's really
it is interesting with Loveland and Sano from K-State and Lachey from Iowa. You could go a 3 tight end lineup. Get 3 tight ends in your wide receiver slots, and you'd be at 12-5 between those 3 guys, and you'd have all the salary for all of your other positions.
Yeah, definitely. And Loveland's going to be like one of those combo tight end guys. That's good. But that's an interesting. I might have to throw that in a GPP lineup or something. All right, moving on to the next game here. UTEP and Northwestern. Not exactly a barn burner type. The one of the lower totals on the slate at 40. UTEP a 1.5 point favorite. It's just so sad to see Northwestern in this state of affairs. Obviously, they got all the off the field stuff going on. Starting with UTEP, Gavin Hardison has been awful. He's been the main signal caller for this team. It feels like forever. He should be able to complete a really, really simple pass by now, and he still struggles. A quarterback that struggles to throw the ball, but yet he doesn't lose his job. So you're obviously not using him. Even though the Rutgers, WIMSAT was actually pretty good against Northwestern last week. If anyone on the UTEP side is worth using, it's Deion Hankins, who through 2 games so far has racked up 228 yards, 39 carries, just under 6 YPC. He has scored a touchdown. Pretty much the only fantasy asset on this team I would have interest in right now. I know Tyron Smith, we know him well, and usually the WR1 for UTEP is really good because despite how bad Hardison is, he's usually mediocre and average enough to make throws to Jacob Cowing and last year Tyron Smith. And that's just not happening through 2 games. Tyron Smith, almost 8K. I can't imagine paying that for him over the Colorado receivers, perhaps. You have those Ole Miss guys who neither one of us are too high on particular paying, except for I like Watkins for cheaper. But this really poor quarterback play is just murdering him. 11 targets in 2 games for a talent like Tyron Smith. That's way too low. There's been times where Cowing in this offense had 20 targets in a game. So to have 11 in 2 games is really not good enough. 9 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. Just personally can't see it happening. Northwestern, obviously they looked listless. They didn't have much energy, didn't have any kind of positive outcome or plays really. So you'd like to see Tyron Smith maybe get back to going here, and maybe he's a GBP play for that reason. But for me, it's Deion Hankins, I think, and he's 6K, another cheaper option that you can use that I don't know the rest of the field would necessarily be on. And Montague last week for Rutgers didn't have the yardage, but the touchdown he scored was relatively easy. And he did have a couple of runs that he just really didn't have any problem gashing them for. I think if he would have gotten any volume, he would have probably put up 100+ yards. On the Northwestern side, Ben Bryant just, he's got the ability, but he's stuck in a situation where the O-line's really bad. I don't know that Bryant has the legs to really kind of, get himself out of trouble. So he was pretty awful last week. Can't use him. Cam Porter is cheap, but he was awful because of that offensive line. Very, very bad. All of the receivers for Northwestern are cheap, and there are 2 who are technically playable. Cam Johnson was targeted 10 times last week, caught 3 of them for 38 yards, but he did play almost 80% of the snaps. So they brought Cam Johnson in from ASU and Vandy, and obviously he's going to be on the field a lot. So you do have Cam Johnson, who's cheap and in play for that reason alone. Now, I do still like the Michigan transfer, AJ Henning. Was targeted 7 times last week. He did get the volume that I was expecting. He had 2 carries, 9 touches, produced about 44 yards. Obviously didn't do, anything super dynamic, but those touches were there, and he was trying his best with as crappy as that line play was. And he played about 71% of snaps. So obviously Johnson and Henning are going to be on the field a lot. And if Northwestern does make any plays, it's going to be through those 2 guys. And Henning has the ability to, take carries, like I said, work in the slot, do some things. Cam Johnson is a reliable target if Ben Bryant can get the time to throw the football. So hopefully they can improve that line play, because I still do believe this Northwestern offense has the potential to be viable for fantasy purposes. But a slate like this, 13 games, it's going to be hard to really recommend using any of them. I do still like Henning, and he is in the pool for me, but we don't have to go there. It's not like week 6 where the pricing is tighter and we don't have really any value. That would be the time where I'd really be kind of pushing AJ Henning, but not right now, not at this time. I did use him last week and he was fine, but this game is really Deion Hankins or bust for me. You want to move on to the Marshall game, or do you have any thoughts on that right quick?
No, we can skip that one.
Cool. So moving on to the last game of the slate, Marshall versus ECU, which has the most glaring pricing error and will have obviously the highest owned guy on the slate. Take it away, Jake.
Yeah. So anytime on, I don't know if it was like Tuesday, we get somebody's salary thrown up in the Discord. You know that most of the industry is going to end up on that guy. So we're of course talking about Rasheen Ali for the Marshall side. He is one of the true bell cow backs. He got 18 carries, which doesn't sound like a ton, in a game that they actually still threw the ball 35 times. And so, but like, other than the quarterback running it, I think there was maybe one other guy that got 2 carries. So this is his backfield, far and away. Had ton of efficiency, 8 yards a carry, 137 yards, couple touchdowns. Again, it was against Albany. So, take that with the context, but it's not as though ECU, is this fantastic defense, although ECU did put up a little bit of a fight against Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. And so if not that I'm saying to do this, I'm not saying to fade Rasheen Ali because ECU is going to sell out to stop the run like they did against Michigan and be successful in doing it. But I do want to bring up that the Marshall passing game actually did some stuff too. And so it's not who you would necessarily think. If you've been following Marshall for a while, you would think, oh, Talik Keaton probably went for 3 catches and 84 yards and scored a touchdown. No, they have 2 high volume guys in Chuck Montgomery and Cade Conley that just were massive target hogs in the Albany game. And so Conley went 7 for 79 yards and Montgomery went 6 for 81 yards and caught the touchdown. Not to say that this is not still Rasheen Ali's team. And yes, you should still play Rasheen Ali because that price tag is like half of what it should be. But I'm not going to fault you for also wanting to get a piece of the Marshall passing game in probably doing that through Montgomery and Conley, because those volume stats are probably still going to be there. It's going to be a competitive game. It's not going to be a particularly high scoring game. It's 41 total, I believe. I think ECU is going to be chomping at the bit to actually be able to put up some points, and not having the Michigan defense across from them. They've got some battle scars now, so I think this could be an interesting competitive game. And I don't think that we should necessarily ignore the passing game on the Marshall side just because we're so concentrated on our Ali exposure. I think that would be a mistake. So do we necessarily think that means we should go to using a quarterback in Cam Fancher from the Marshall side? I don't think so. I think, at that 6,300, if we're playing down there in that price range, we probably end up on a Hudson Card instead. But I think that it is not only reasonable, but, possibly advantageous, especially from a GPP, large field GPP perspective, to use pieces of that passing game. On the ECU side, I don't know who I want to use. that offense wasn't going to be very good to begin with and showed just how bad they were against a tough Michigan defense. That in and of itself tells us nothing. They were always going to struggle against Michigan. I don't, I probably do want to have somebody that I am running that back with, especially if I have both a receiver and Ali in a lineup. I don't have anyone right now that I'm particularly high on from the ECU side. I guess Jalen Johnson is kind of maybe the guy that I would lean towards in terms of like, hey, that's a volume play that could also have some upside. But maybe you've got a guy you're a little bit more confident in, because I'm not super confident in this ECU offense being particularly concentrated. But I do think there's going to be some production somewhere. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Johnson, probably the most obvious if you are going there. He's 4'6", so he's, again, another cheap guy in that category, and he was targeted team high 9 times. So, like you said, we couldn't really derive anything from the Michigan game. Jalen Johnson and Josiah Hadfield are the two, for me, known kind of quantities in this offense. You got a little Marlon Gunn maybe, but I don't think that beyond those two names I'd want to really use anybody. If we get a sense that people are looking to Johnson, I think Hatfield for 300 less makes a lot of sense, because I don't know that Johnson's necessarily going to outscore him. I know Hatfield, targets wise, was only targeted 3 times, caught 2 of them, but he kind of wiped that game away for the opponent. And knowing going up against Marshall, he's probably going to get some more looks, especially because it started to look like, towards the end of last year, that Hatfield was kind of ascending into a higher role. I know he's kind of gone up and down in terms of his production throughout his career, but I do think he kind of steps into a WR2 spot here. So I don't mind using him in like a GPP, but I don't think that anybody would make my main lineup, even if it comes out later this week that everybody's on Jalen Johnson at that price. I'm okay still fading. And if I lose to him or an ECU guy, then so be it. I guess it wasn't my day. But I don't have any super sneaks from that one, unfortunately. But I like the Marshall out for the receivers. I don't know that people will really be doing that, so that's a good way to maybe get a little bit of leverage off of Ali there on some of your GP lineups. All right, so it was a long one. It was a ton of games. We were very in-depth. We'll wrap it up with a couple of things here. First, let's get, if you're ready, a core from you for DraftKings. I will give one on FanDuel as well, and then we'll end it with some PrizePicks plays and your line in the sand play if you have one.
Yeah. So core is actually probably going to be pretty obvious. And it's hard to get away from a lot of these guys. So hopefully we're not on all of the same people, but yeah, I have to do it, cause I don't really love any other quarterback. I'm going to take Pratt at quarterback. I am going to take Ray Davis, and I'll leave you, Judkins and Black to choose from yours. So I'll take Ray Davis as part of the core as well, and then I'm going to take Deion Burks at the receiver spot.
Love it. So I'll start with FanDuel. They have the Texas Tech Oregon game on there, and as much as I am not a big Tyler Shuck fan at 9.4, he's kind of interesting there, but I'd say Jeff Sims at 8K on FanDuel has to be a core. Well, I'm talking myself into him on DraftKings. Perhaps I think on FanDuel it's a little easier to do that. I would say Quinshon Judkins, he's 10.5. He would be the, for me, core running back. And then at wide receiver, you get Javon Baker there from UCF. You don't usually get guys this cheap that are relevant on FanDuel, but he's under 7K. So that would be my FanDuel core. On DraftKings at quarterback, we'll have to share Pratt there. I don't see either, any other spots really to go there that I have a definitive, like, yes, I'm going to play this guy. I know that Jeff Sims is going to have a lot of ownership on both sites. And again, I'm the more we've gone through the slate, I kept waiting for that second quarterback to really emerge for me. It hasn't happened. And I like the running back pool. So I might be leaning towards a one running back or one quarterback lineup. I'm not quite sure yet, but yes, Pratt, Judkins, thank you for leaving me that one. But Black, Galen Black, I think that's 1A, 1B for me. And then, wide receiver wise, it's a little bit tougher because there are so many good options in that cheap range. That I will stick with the popular game in Colorado, but I will give Xavier Weaver as my third core play. But that's probably going to change by the time I get to Saturday morning. So that is where we are at there. Let's move into PrizePicks here. I'll start giving you a second there. I'm sure you have yours loaded up, but sticking with Pratt, the combo pass plus rush yards. They don't have receptions, by the way. You must have broke PrizePicks. I don't see the receptions category on there. I know they were getting beat up by several people there, and now they're not even offering it. The new category for me, the last 2 weeks that we've been playing in the last year too, was the passing plus rushing yards. That category has been pretty nice for me, and they are offering Michael Pratt at 261.5 pass plus rushing yards. So I am taking the over on that. They also have Jeff Sims' number at 245.5, but I'm not brave enough to take that one. But I do like Pratt's over combo 261.5. I think we see him run a little bit more, like push towards the 50 rushing yards. So that definitely puts him in the mix there for that. Damian Martinez, I know this is a later game. They're playing UC Davis. The potential to be yanked away quick could happen, but I have over 105.5 rushing yards. I think he'll have that by halftime before they pull him out because he's just that good. I'm that excited about him this season. And then I had one more on the pull it up here. The receiving yards. It's your guy there, Deion Brooks, over 52.5 receiving yards. I mean, that seems pretty damn low for the bona fide likely WR1. I know DJ Sheffield's still around there, but they don't have as many options as they've been having the last couple of years. So Burks over 52.5 seems like a pretty fat lock to me. Those are my 3 that I like. What do you got?
Yeah. So that was one of them for me. That was the first one that did jump out to me was the Burks over 52.5. Gonna stay just on the passing side for Pratt, 227.5. Yes, I think he'll run the ball plenty. I'm a little bit worried about the sacks negating some of that, so I want to stick to just his passing total, but I like your play fine too. I think he might get over yours with just passing yards anyway. So without even having to worry about what that rushing total looks like. Then on the fantasy score side of things, I really like AJ Swan over 15 fantasy score. I mean, I know that he's more of a true pocket passer type quarterback, but I think that's going to be a fairly high scoring game. And they're not going to be able to just turn the ball over to the running backs and let them get all the glory the way. And by the way, Cedric Alexander had a fantastic game when he wasn't on the slate in week 2.
Scored twice. Yep.
don't need to talk about that at all. So I think that they are going to be able to toss it a bit and get in the end zone through the air. So AJ Swan, and that's a weird start time. That's an 11 o'clock Eastern start time. So not on on the DraftKings slate, but is that on the FanDuel slate? Is that going?
No,
right?
I don't think so. No, I don't see it. No.
Okay. Yeah. So that game might get overlooked from the PrizePicks perspective because it's not really on there in terms of most of the DFS slates. I do like that. And then let's see. We'll try to give you one that we haven't gone over. I also like Jalen Lane in that same Vatek. I really like that Vatek Purdue game. Over 47.5 receiving yards, kind of that pinball, quick score, lots of yards through the air available kind of game. If you want to throw him and Burks into the same one, get some, correlation there. I think that's a decent way to go. And then let's see, we'll see if we can get one from a later game. Did you hit Damian Martinez?
You did, huh? That's one of my favorite ones, actually. I know the risk is there, but it's too good.
Yeah, no, we had talked about that before, I think, but I mean, he could get that in the second quarter, and then you're good. I also kind of like Marshawn Lloyd. He emerged as really more of the guy that they were giving heavy volume to. And yes, it was a blowout, but I think most USC games are going to be blowouts from, at least until we start seeing Oregon and teams that can put up a fight and compete with them offensively. And so a good amount of volume for Marshawn Lloyd, over 55.5 rushing yards seems like a pretty easy number if he gets 12 to 14 carries the way that I would kind of expect him to in this one.
Definitely. All right, just wrapping it up. For a couple props. I will have a prop article out tomorrow with some of these, but so I'll save it for that. But the one that I want to highlight is for tomorrow's game, and it's going to be super impossible to find the plus 450 anytime touchdown score. Don't want to keep harping on Nash, but I keep waiting for another player where it's like, yes, we have these amazing odds, and it's just not there. So Devin Neal's anytime touchdown for tomorrow is minus 185, which I know isn't the best odds in the world, but it's good enough at minus 185. He's just a guy that can score as a receiver, as a rusher. We know there's quarterback drama there with Daniels is going to play or not. Neal's just going to score a touchdown against Illinois. So minus 185 for the prop tomorrow for those of you who are looking for some betting stuff. Other than that, we'll wrap up and get out of here on the almost infamous now line in the sand play. Who do you got and what kind of stat line do you have for us to exit out on?
Okay. So, he'll be popular. So it's not quite as much as the Ray Davis thing, although I guess Ray Davis was kind of popular last week too. But Burks, his first one that jumped out at me, and I'm sticking by it in a game that's not overly sexy or overly hyped. But I'm going to say Burks goes for 8 catches, 125 yards, and 2 touchdowns.
Love it. That'll be a big stat line for his price, but you've been running pretty good, and let's keep it going after last week. Appreciate everybody who tuned in live or on demand. Make sure you guys are hitting that like button and subscribing to the FTN channel. I'll be back Saturday morning at 8 a.m. PST, 11 a.m. EST for all the last-minute lineup news and depth chart chatter. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, everybody who tuned in. We will see you guys next week.